Chinese Premier Li Keqiang visits Europe. A major bomb blast in Kabul kills dozens. And a general election in the United Kingdom next week. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. One of the big international stories this week is the decision by the United States President Donald Trump to pull the US out of the Paris Climate Agreement. The announcement came while China's Premier Li was on a visit to Europe for a meeting with Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel and other European leaders at the EU-China summit in Brussels. China and the EU have committed to pushing ahead with the Paris climate deal. Meanwhile, Afghanistan suffered another deadly assault this week with more than 90 people killed after a suicide bomb blast in Kabul. The attack took place in the diplomatic quarter of the city on Wednesday. And voters in the United Kingdom will decide next week if Prime Minister Theresa May is the person they want to lead them into Brexit negotiations with Europe. All big news stories for our international panel to discuss. With us here in the studio is Ansgar Graw. He is senior political correspondent with the German newspaper Die Welt. Also joining us from Beijing is Qinduo Xu. He is a political analyst with China Radio International. Also with me here in Washington is Andrew Small. He is senior transatlantic fellow with the Asia program at the German Marshall Fund. And joining us too is CGTN correspondent Nathan King. Welcome to all of you to the show. Qinduo, let me start with you. Premier Li has been in Germany. He's met with the German Chancellor Angela Merkel in Berlin. He's also met with other European leaders in Brussels at the EU-China summit. Well, a lot has happened while he was in Europe. How important is this relationship now between China and the Europeans, given that Donald Trump has decided to pull the US out of the Paris Climate Accord?
Let's say because of the election victory of Donald Trump in the United States, it creates another dimension in terms of China's relationship with Germany, relationship with Europe. At the beginning, like of this year or last year, let's say, it's mostly against the background about the rising populism and protectionism, anti-globalization trend. But with Donald Trump now, especially the withdrawal from Paris Agreement, somehow you see there's a strong incentive from the European side and as well as the Chinese side to work together, to cooperate, especially on the issue to fight climate change.
Ansgar, this is an important agreement, the Paris Climate Accord. Europe and China strongly committed to implementing this accord. Has this relationship suddenly become a lot more significant?
I think it is going to become much more significant, and Angela Merkel has said over the last few days, China is becoming a strategic partner. Up to now, it was a very important partner in regard to trade, for example, and I think China is one of the countries who traveled Merkel the most. I don't know exactly how often she has been there, but now she says it's a strategic partner, and that means United States is saying goodbye to kind of the leadership of the free or Western world, and therefore China will be more important. The question will be, will China take international responsibility more as it did in the last years?
Andrew, do you think the United States president recognizes that he's giving up this very important role, leadership of what they call the Western world?
I'm not sure there's actually been the level of understanding here, even beyond the presidency, about the way the climate issue is viewed in some other parts of the world. I think in Europe it is viewed as a security issue, it's viewed as a sort of existential issue with ramifications that go well beyond just the immediate issues around energy and emissions and these sorts of questions. So I think the strategic ramifications are genuinely serious, and I'm not necessarily sure they were as fully appreciated in a framework here, where I think this is seen through a different prism.
Yeah, you want to say?
If it would be only the climate change, or the climate deal, you could say so, and you could argue it's not seen so important here as it is seen in Europe. But only some days before, there was this NATO summit in Brussels, and everybody expected that Donald Trump would say something about Article 5 of the NATO treaty. And he didn't, and therefore there are these two things. He says goodbye to the climate deal, and he doesn't say the same commitment, or doesn't show the same commitment to NATO. He said before, NATO is going to become obsolete, and I think all those factors are going together, and it shows, I think, not only the Europeans, that the leading role of the United States is deteriorating.
And the trade piece too, of course.
And the trade piece as well.
I just think it's the way he says these things as well. You know, you can talk to NATO members and ask them to pay more in a collaborative way. You can say, look, we don't think the Paris Agreement actually reflects our national interests because of X, Y, and Z. But anyone listening to that speech yesterday, we were at the White House, it was very insulting to a lot of countries, finger pointing at China, finger pointing at India, basically essentially saying the world is laughing at us, taking advantage of us. And that seems to be repeated on issue after issue after issue. And
right, Nathan, we have Donald Trump, as you point out, scolding other NATO leaders. We have him not on the same page as his G7 partners. Is this going to benefit China?
Well, you know, it's leadership by default, isn't it? You know, if you step back, then there's a vacuum, and someone has to fill it. You know, a lot of people, we see a lot of articles in the last 24 hours saying China has the mantle of green leadership. Well, that's not how it works, because if the country that has the second biggest emissions, 18%, steps back and their emissions goes up, everyone loses. The climate agreement is not some sort of zero-sum game. Right. And so China is one of the leaders, but China and the US, it really helps cement that relationship, even in rocky times when other parts of the relationship weren't going well. And so if climate change does not unite Beijing and Washington anymore, what does? The DPRK? Probably not. So actually, if I was sitting in Beijing, I'd be a little bit more worried about the relationship because the US is stepping back. You don't have climate as a vehicle for the two countries to come together.
Well, there's also trade. Let me go to Qinduo in Beijing about that. Qinduo, as I mentioned, President Li has met with the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel. This is his third visit to Germany. She's, of course, also been a visitor to China many times. And we're looking at this age of globalization right now. So how important will trade be in defining the relationship between China and Europe?
Well, it's very important, you know. European Union as a whole is the largest trading partner of China, and German-China trade accounts for like 30% of that. And if you look at the investment last year, the Chinese investment in Germany has increased like more than 200%. And vice versa, German investment in China has increased like more than 74%. So you can see the trend is actually more and more trade between the two sides. So China is the largest trading partner of Germany. Last year, China replaced the United States to become the largest trading partner. So obviously, as the Chinese market is growing, as the Chinese economy is basically transforming from exporting to basically a consumption-based market. So you can see a lot more products from European countries, including Germany, will be on the Chinese market. The potential is huge, I would say.
And the other big plus for Germany, Ansgar, is the fact that Mrs. Merkel actually has a very good personal relationship with the Chinese leadership.
I think she has a personal relationship due to the number of visits in one or the other direction. And I think she has, like the United States, for example, on the other side, realized very, very early, in a very early time, that China is becoming more and more important for the world trade. And I think since President Trump decided to quit this TPP, this Trans-Pacific Partnership deal, the situation for China has improved, since now China is trying to get some free trade agreements, not only with European countries, but for example with Canada, and with they are discussing with Mexico, they are discussing with Georgia in the Caucasus region, and I think that makes it better for China. And the big problem is, up to now in the Asia region, there was this Pax Americana, and Trump, who said America first, seems to have decided that's not so important. Let China have this Asia room and Asia space, and we will look just for America and for the American space. And I'm not sure whether this is very intelligent in the end.
And as this relationship between China and Germany gets closer, what are the major benefits for both sides?
I think the major benefit is trade, and very important, for example, is a question about cars. The most important deal for Germany. They have discussed or even decided to upgrade Mercedes-Benz factory in Beijing, that it can also produce electric cars, and there was a kind of an agreement how many electric cars they should produce in China. And the other big important question, I think it's not totally solved, but they discussed it, is free market access for German entrepreneurs in China. And I think that's still development. We have to see the outcome, and everybody is hoping that China is going more and more in the direction of a free economy and market economy. Yeah. And China claims we are a market-driven economy, and I think that has to be proven.
Okay, let's turn to another part of the world right now. Andrew, let's go to Afghanistan. A bomb blast there killing 90 people, more than 90 people, in Kabul's diplomatic quarter. It was one of the worst attacks that we've seen in recent years. Is the crisis getting worse there?
I mean, the attack was, as you say, the fact that it took place in such a sensitive location in the city, and the sheer number of civilian casualties, in both those respects, it was a significant cause for concern. There have been protests today in Kabul. The Afghan government has blamed Pakistan. Tensions there have been really worsening over the last couple of years, and we're just at the juncture where there are major decisions being taken by the United States about the scale and nature of its continued troop presence and broader strategy there. So it's been at points a sort of forgotten conflict almost here in the United States, and in some respects people have become quite inured to death counts and these terrible things that have been going on there. I think this was on a scale that somewhat transcended that, and it's been a deteriorating situation in some respects for the last couple of years. The Afghan National Security Forces have, in some respects, they've been more resilient than expected. There's no imminent Taliban takeover or something like this, but the capacity of whichever actor this was, the Taliban themselves have disavowed responsibility. There were some initial claims that it was ISIS. Afghan intelligence has suggested that it was a Taliban-linked group, the Haqqanis, that was responsible for it. But the capacity to hit these high sensitivity targets, it remains a very serious cause for concern when it comes to the long-term viability of the government there.